We rise with a purpose, shine through the night. Voices of courage, lifting the light. Step into your moment, let your spirit fly. We are the voices that reach for the sky.
Welcome to Voices of Purpose, a podcast that shines a light on the quiet heroes, passionate change makers, and the everyday people answering the call to make a difference.
Here we explore the stories behind the mission, the why that drives the work, and celebrate the power of purpose in action.
Hello, I'm Chris Wooters.
And I'm Chris Hibbett. We're the hosts of your show for today.
All right, let's jump into today's conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voices of Purpose. I'm Chris Wooters.
And I'm Chris Hibbett, and we're your hosts for today's episode.
Today, we're honored to welcome a true pioneer in patient advocacy and a relentless force in the fight against Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. Pat Furlong, the founding president and CEO of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, also known as PPMD.
Pat turned personal tragedy into a global movement, creating a path of hope and action for thousands of families. Her strength, leadership, and compassion have inspired so many, including both of us.
Pat, thank you so much for being here and being our very first guest on Voices of Purpose. It means the world to us to start this journey with someone who embodies what purpose truly looks like in action. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I've actually known Pat for quite a while. My son had Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, and I tell you, the stories that we had with Pat, she's truly meant to me like more than just someone that's just does their job and just goes straight forward. She's gone above and beyond to the fact of even, I remember one Christmas, we were celebrating it, and she actually called up and was checking on my kids, and we hadn't actually ever had that, with someone that was dealing with that's done with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. They would always check on Sam, and they wouldn't actually check on my other two kids, and that meant the world. That she was actually checking up on them, and the PPMD actually sent them some stuff, so it meant the world to me.
Well, thank you for that. I think one of the hardest things is to receive a catastrophic diagnosis and then feel so alone. And not only is the family, the parents struggling, but all the other kids are as well. So I think lifting them up and holding them together is really important.
Yeah, it affects the family, doesn't it, as well? It's not just the individual, it affects the whole family.
You're right. It does. It affects the whole family, and for a very long time. I think forever. I know my daughters are still impacted by the loss of Chris and Patrick, and I think we all feel that, especially on holidays when we feel like there's chairs that are empty at the table. So it's really very difficult.
And if you don't mind, Pat, do you mind just giving a kind of a backstory as far as like your, what your story is and kind of, how you got started, and we'll just start from there.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So long ago, when I was really young and figuring out what I wanted to do, I became a nurse, and I worked hard in terms of adult medicine. So I was in renal dialysis, and I was in the intensive care unit and emergency room. And I worked there because, first of all, it was primarily adults. And I think adults, sometimes you can justify an illness in your mind, right? They've lived a long time. They've lived a good life, those kinds of things. And for the most part, you're in this ER situation, or in my case, a transplant situation, and you want to give them the best care. But you can have a conversation with them about what makes sense in terms of their diagnosis and what makes sense in terms of their next steps in progress. I didn't want to take care of children because I couldn't bear to see children who were sick. And I just, even when I go into a children's hospital these days, I feel like wishing I had a magic wand and saying, everybody's fine and let's all stop this. So in 1984, and before, when my little boys were born, and I have 4 children, 2 stair-step children every 2 years, Jenny's the oldest, then Michelle, then Christopher, and then Patrick. When they were growing up, I noticed that they were weak. And I really couldn't put my head around what that weakness was. It's just that they didn't keep up with their friends. They didn't like to do stairs. They didn't jump. They didn't run. And when I talked to physicians about that, I was sort of dismissed because, you're a neurotic mom. You're just worried all the time. All of those things are true. I was worried all the time about my children. But then one day when Chris was outside, he was trying to pedal a two-wheeler. We had encouraged him, get on this little trike and see if you can pedal. And as he pushed the pedal, I think he must have injured his Achilles tendon. So in that, he cried out in pain. I carried him in the house, gave him some Tylenol, and he was crying most of the night. So that next morning, my husband, who's a physician, said, take him to see an orthopedic surgeon friend of ours. And he said, I called, his name was Steve. He said, I called Steve and he's ready to see you. So just bring Chris. And I asked Tom, my husband, well, what do you think this might be? And he said, I'm not sure, although he had tears in his eyes. So I knew that he had some idea. So I walked into the office of Steve, an orthopedic surgeon, and he took one look at Chris and he said, he has Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. And he asked me what Patrick looked like. And I said, Patrick is 2 years behind in exactly the same body type. And he said, well, then you have two. And then, the next sentence is, so where do we go and how do we treat this disease? And he said, there is no treatment for this disease. They will follow a very specific natural history where they will lose the ability to walk by the time they're 9 or 10. They won't lift their arms to their head or feed themselves by the time they're 15 or 16, and they'll be dead in their late teens. So I then went down to Cincinnati Children's Hospital to confirm the diagnosis, imagining that it wouldn't be the diagnosis, but they in fact confirmed the diagnosis. And the neurologist down there was a little more direct when I asked him, where could we go to treat this disease? And he said, there's no help here and there's no hope here. So you need to get that in your brain. So all of a sudden, the world ended in terms of what world I knew and what plans I had. And then what do? You try to save a life. You try to make sure that the days they are going to spend on this earth are good days. And so that sort of got me into the world of pediatrics and more specifically Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard, it's hard, as a parent that hasn't never been through it, sometimes people ask me like how it feels, and you don't really know how to tell them, because I'm sure you felt the same way, that you have these hopes and dreams for your kids, and then within seconds, it's gone. We had kind of a similar story with Sam. We were actually at my wife's aunt's house, and she saw Sam get up off the floor, and he was 3, and she said, I hate to tell you this, but your son has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's like,
wow, that's pretty amazing, Chris.
Yeah, and it was it was hard, because you then, like you said, you want to deny it. You want to say no, it's not, but then you get to another doctor, and then it hits that it changes overnight. I'm sure it changed you as a nurse. It obviously has. I mean, kind of gave you I'm guessing a purpose, because you've done so much great things with this PPMD.
Well, thank you. I think, back then in the early 90s, all we had in terms of Duchenne was a gene and a protein product. So that's all we knew about this. We knew it was genetic, and we knew that there was a missing protein. And at that moment, you have to ask yourself some questions about what's next and where do we go and what does care look like? And could we use medical tools to help them? And, one of my biggest questions was, is the heart a muscle? Is that at risk? So I think you begin to ask all these questions, and clearly you're grieving, but you're all grieving, in my view, as a state of life, right? When you see a diagnosis like this. So you're always grieving, but in that grief, you have to kind of think through, so how can I help my own? But I think then the grief goes further about, how can I help somebody else? Even if it's just to connect with them and say, this is hard, and I'm standing here with you, even though I can't touch you, perhaps because we're on Zoom, but I can't, hold on to you, but I can say to you, I've been there, and let's work together to see if we can take a step forward.
Yeah, and it's definitely a good community that has grown for sure. I know that one of the things that we didn't know is my wife actually, her mother had been tested for what they thought was Duchenne's, because she actually had brothers that had died from it in the 60s, 70s. And at that time, they just did not have the technology to be able to actually test to see if they were carriers or not. And my wife actually has some of the heart failures that a lot of the Duchenne's boys have, and she actually, it actually affects her heart because she's a carrier. That's not the case in all of them, but it's happened more and more that they've been able to see. But we didn't know that 20 years ago.
No, I know in some families, I don't have family history, but I too am a carrier. So my mother was not a carrier. When testing was available, they tested me and they tested my mom. And, there was something down deep in me that wanted her to be a carrier. So, somehow share the grief that I felt as being a carrier. And I think in the 60s, when young boys died of a disease that they couldn't put their finger on, right, then it has come through. We just didn't have the genetics to be able to say that let's test and see if you carry the same gene. And, I guess at the end of the day, Chris, would it have changed anything? I've been on newborn screening panels and I said, maybe so if you're young and you know that you're a carrier and you can do all the genetics, maybe. But I think the time we spent with our boys was incredibly valuable. And I think they taught us lessons that we couldn't have otherwise learned. So I wouldn't wish Duchenne on anyone. And certainly if there are carriers, you want to know the genetics of this disease. But as carriers, just like you said, you do have to take care of yourself because carriers have a risk of heart disease and muscle weakness along the way as well. So it is a devastating diagnosis, but not unlike many other rare disease diagnoses.
Yeah, when Sam was our oldest, and we were starting to look at whether or not to have kids or not, and Liz became pregnant, and they immediately told us to abort because there's too much of a chance to have a child with genetic, have Duchenne's again, and they told us just abort right then and there. And my daughter's actually named Faith because this was not a planned pregnancy, and we had to have faith that no matter what, we would go through it and we would see it through. And she came through, and she's been a sounding board for what Sam was. She helped him all throughout. He was in his wheelchair to be that little sister to help out along the way, and I would not change it one bit. So I would not go back, and do it any other way.
Yeah, no, I think when faced with those decisions, it's so incredibly difficult, right, to see your way through. And I think so many times you have people, nice, wonderful people giving you 1,000 opinions. So you think one way, and then you have 1,000 opinions in your face, and you think I have to think another way. But ultimately, you made the right decision. Faith is amazing. And my daughters were born before my sons, but they too, first of all, they've learned, and they're incredibly kind women, which is what I would wish for all children. And we all learned along the way. So I think that's part of family. It is part of being together and being a place of faith, a place of hope, and a place of togetherness. And for me, that's what family means.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of family, I truly think that the group that you've put together has been a great big family. I see the work that you're doing with the advocacy, and every year you've put this different conferences together. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's grown and how that has grown the family together and really helped out both the parents and the kids that are dealing with the diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally we all can do something, right? So what the something is each of our own decisions and abilities and resources. So when I started PPMD long ago now, 30 years ago, I systematically met, basic scientists and others, and they were sort of laughing at me because my thought was, we're going to fix this, right? We're going to cure it, and we're just going to raise money. And one of the basic scientists said to me, well, Pat, you're not going to be able to fix this disease by small fundraisers, right? It's cost billions of dollars to develop drugs and therapies, let alone care and all of the things, the tools that you have to build. So he was really funny in that he kind of said to me, a bake sale is not going to get you a drug, which I will never forget his little comment, which always makes me laugh even today. So I asked him how the federal government worked and how they invest in research. And it was interesting because, for so many of us, I think the government feels so remote, and it feels like you're one voice out of 300 million in the United States. So how could it make a difference, and why would anyone listen? So that day when we happened to be at the National Institutes of Health, he said, let's figure out how it works, and let's hire some people that can guide us in that process. So we did. We went and hired a Washington consultant. They're called Fagre, a Drinker at this moment. And we said, how do we make these voices count? How do we systematically change the investment, or at least increase the investment in Duchenne? And that became advocacy. So as people became interested in advocacy and recognized that even with 300 million people, your voice makes a difference because you're represented in Congress, both on the House and the Senate side, and you can meet those people. And we also stress the fact that it's about community and family, right? It's not just one time, hey, would you do this for me? It's a relationship that you want to build so that you can understand their perspective and your perspective. And that has worked out very well. We this year we had 150 families from 34 states come into Washington, D.C. And even in change of administration and change of policies, they were able to meet with their representatives, and they were able to talk about this disease. And again, establishing that relationship is something you can do even if you do it at home with your local office, your local state office, or when your representatives come to town. So I think sometimes we, as parents or people, when we see a catastrophe, we think the big picture, like how can I totally fix it, right? But the answer is we can all do something, and collectively then that makes a difference. So what was instrumental here is we all wanted the same things. We wanted standards of care. So we wanted to know how best to care for these young men and some women. We wanted to have an investment in research, and we wanted these groups of people to be working together. And then we wanted a plan of how to stepwise go forward. So that we basically wrote on the back of an envelope. So standards of care, centers of excellence, and a research plan. And that became collectively this piece of legislation that all of the advocates went to their representatives and talked about in a consistent way. My family has Duchenne. This piece of legislation is going to help them. So what happened then is in 2001, the MD Care Act, as it was called, was introduced into the House and Senate on February 14th, actually 2001. And then even in that instance, we continued to have those relationships. And so at the end of 2001, this was signed into law. So the MD Care Act now continues to be in law, and that means the National Institutes of Health has to invest in this disease. So if we fast forward all those years and ask ourselves, what was that federal investment, or what is the investment, the whole investment over time, is $800 million of federal research funds has gone into this disease, which brought industry here, right? Because then the disease was, we not only knew the gene, we knew the protein product, we knew what that protein does inside the cell, we knew what happens when muscle breaks down and inflammation and fibrosis. So we knew, we sort of had the hardware and the software of this disease. So then people could say, hey, I think I could fix the genetics, AAV gene therapy, or I feel like I could skip an exon and restore protein. So all of those ideas were fundamentally funded by the National Institutes of Health, which is an incredible scientific machine, if you will, that has really pioneered all sorts of therapies for Duchenne and many other diseases. And that's where we turn around and say to the advocates, you did this, right? You did this by creating a relationship with the people that represent you, and they listen to your story. And so back to that, all of your stories matter, and the stories of all of us collectively matter and make change. And so I think that's, and we talk about family a lot, right? We have a biological family. We have some crazy aunts and uncles in every family. We always talk about that. But then we have our extended family who care for us and support us and love us because we have a connection. And I always think about what are our connections. Music's one of them, and your songs are incredible. I love them. Also, food is one of them, but disease is one of them, a diagnosis. So that if you have the same diagnosis, we don't have to explain ourselves to each other. And you can have tears in your eyes, and I get that. And so I think it's that extended family that really makes you feel less alone. And it's a family that I think you can rely on for truth and honesty and guidance and friendship. And at the end of the day, love.
Yeah, so much all happened from writing the back of a little note in $800 million. That's quite a bit to come from that.
It's incredible, absolutely incredible. So 30 years later, pretty much all of the science that is now helping Duchenne is really come from what you started, which is absolutely incredible.
Well, again, I think I was one person, but one person can't do it, right? I met other people.
No.
And
but it takes a spark.
And we all listen to each other's stories. And it's interesting because, as we met different parents, even thinking about legislation, one of the parents we met worked in Washington, D.C. So I think when you work in Washington, D.C., it's an interesting environment. You seem to know everybody and know who to talk to and what to say. So I think it's also who you meet along the way, and they can do with their skills and their connections to take you to the next step. And I always think for all of us, there's always a next step, right? And also the ripple effect of one single connection is mighty. And I think that's sometimes in grief, we forget about connecting to the next person.
Yeah, and that's for sure. It's the stories, like you said, and that's why we wanted to do this, because there's so many people that think they're alone and that they think that they can't do it by themselves. But to hear like how you've taken this in 30 years, I'll be honest, like seeing what you're doing with PPMD and looking at what others have tried to do, it's incredible to see all the different drugs and all the different therapies that have come out of PPMD that would have not been there if it wouldn't have been for you to take that next step, and actually come out of that grief and to say, how do I go forward? How do I go through that next door? And deciding to go through that door. I think some people are just afraid sometimes to step forward and to do things on their own because they're such stuck in their grief.
Yeah, well, I think we all get frightened of taking a next step and getting a no. And I can tell you that we've gotten lots of no's, and then you hope for a yes, and those yeses are really celebrated. But the worst case scenario is you're already grieving. If you go through a door and the door doesn't open, that's not increasing your grief. It might increase your frustration, but then you try the next door, right? So I think when I was going to Washington, I felt like they can't make this worse than it already is. So if they say yes, we're a leg up. And I think that's how we have to look at all of this. If we can do one thing for somebody, we've got a leg up, and we just continue, because it's pretty nice to see a yes, hard to see a no. But if you keep going, you're going to eventually get to a yes, I can help. And that's the best, nice reward.
Yeah. And one of the other things I wanted to make sure we highlight is some of the different fundraising ways you guys have been going about that actually talk to a lot of different other organizations and let them know about, one of them being Run for Our Sons. Do you mind talking a little bit about that one?
No, it's a funny story, because one of the parents, again, Connections, called, and she was a runner, and she said, why, Disney has all of these different runs. Why don't you consider joining the run? Well, I'm not a runner. And so the first time we were down there, not even having an idea, what is this Disney run and what does it look like and how many people? I went down there with Kimberly, one of my colleagues who works with me at PPMD, and we went down there, and we were, you take this long journey into one of the parks, and then you're in a queue, and then these people are running. So the first time Kim and I were down there, and we thought we'll just sit and watch this run. Well, it turns out there's 70,000 runners. So it's not like you can pick out your person and all these different corrals. So we learned a lot. And then what was, I think, spectacular for me, first of all, is 70,000 people. Not all the runs are 70,000, and now there's a 5K on a Thursday and a 10 on Friday and a half on Saturday, and then a full marathon on Sunday. People who do all those races get a goofy medal, which I think is goofy to run all those races. And I think what was amazing to me is first of all, I was a cheerleader. So we'd go to different places and cheer on our runners. We have sometimes 200 runners plus or minus. But the other parts of this, those 70,000 runners are running because they care about something. And to listen to their stories. And then finally, I didn't want to be a cheerleader. I knew I couldn't do a marathon or a half marathon. But to walk rapidly in the 5 or the 10, last year when I was doing the Disney 10, running is a very loose term for me. I was walking fast, and I was walking next to a woman with an oxygen tank. And so I just sort of moved next to her and said, how are you doing? And are you okay? And she said, I have lung cancer. And I just want to complete one race. So it's that, right? 70,000 people doing something that matters deeply to them. So the stories, so our race has expanded. And so we now do a lot of Disney. Disney has different races, as you might imagine. Our biggest one is the one that's just after the holidays. And that's where, again, I think for families, that's one of the most fun races, because last year we had, I think, about 120 families, and somebody in the family was running the race, or one of those races. Again, it's community. Those people were there to have fun with their family, to meet their larger family and connect. And that is it, right? To connect. And this time it wasn't about science or medicine or what are you going to do or who do you see or what doctor or what hope do you have? It was just about having fun. And so how this has evolved is we participate in the New York Marathon, which is amazing. And obviously you have to be a real runner to do that. And so we participate in some of the big runs, but also there's a family in Michigan that started a 0.1K run. Now, 0.1K is across the street, right? So they live in a small town. They went down to their center of town and talked to where there's shopping area and some restaurants. And they said, we're going to do a 0.1K. If you would give everyone a free drink after this, because we'll end up at your restaurants. And if you would give them all a free drink, then that would be amazing. And probably you'd make money in terms of people and traffic in your restaurants. So that's what happened. So the 0.1K is a really funny race. Now I think last year there were around 5,000 people. And keep in mind, you're going to run across the street. And everyone you can participate walking, running, in a chair, in a scooter, whatever. And we warm them up. So we make them do exercises for the race, and we give them a little drink of water so they don't get dehydrated. So it's really great fun. Music, even in mid street, you can get another drink of water if you're getting dehydrated. And then everyone goes to the restaurants for some kind of drink. But this, again, is a family thing, right? And I think for me, it's all about that, right? It's about now 5,000 runners who came to run across the street and go have lunch with friends. And that fundraiser over the last, I think it's been in effect about 15 years, has raised a total of $1 million. Wow. Because those runners pays $10. So it's also, when we think about trying to be able to have events that everyone can participate in, going to Disney, as you all know, is a very expensive proposition. To go there, to fly there, to stay in those hotels, and never mind buy any of food at Disney is, 10 times what you pay going to the grocery store. But then the 0.1K is $10. And I venture to say, for the family, if you said I don't have the $10, they'd say, no, that's fine. Just exercise and have a drink of water. So I think it's that, because our family is wide and broad and has different resources, different philosophies, different wishes. And I think to respect all of those wishes and all of their decisions in there is critical to being family.
You talked about family a lot, which I think is absolutely wonderful. But I'd like to try and appreciate a little bit more about how wide that family spread. Obviously, you guys are in the US. I'm in the UK. How far globally does the organisation reach? And are you reaching out to any new areas at the moment?
So we're global to the degree that we can be global. So I chair the Community Advisory Board for Europe, which means that this is representative of Eastern and Western European countries and Israel. So companies come and talk to us, and we share care and research with each other in those areas. I've also more recently been to Africa, which is a fascinating country, and met some of the physicians in Zambia and Cape Town who are taking care of Duchenne. And certainly one of the worries there is they struggle with genetic diagnosis. So they see, in this case, boys with weakness, and if a young boy with weakness may be Duchenne, but it may be something else. So trying to get genetic testing for them, that would be, because in genetic testing, there are lots of labs around the world, but none in South Africa that do this testing. And so trying to figure out how to help them, and then how to care for them, and try to interest industry to come there and do clinical trials and deliver therapies. Also South America. This is also a place where there's no infrastructure for rare disease clinical trials. and very little infrastructure for delivering of therapies. So and India is another place that I am always concerned about. So in my head, I have a couple wishes that are dreams and probably won't come true in my lifetime. But if we could somehow build a bridge for these families to come to a place, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US, where these families could be diagnosed and treated, that would be pretty amazing. I also think in terms of adults with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, because now the lifespan of Duchenne is into the third decade for many. But by the time you get into the 30s, you're again in the natural history of the disease, you're not able to lift your hand to your mouth, for instance. So you need a lot of care and support. So if we think about the care and support that some of these individuals need, in my dreams, we build facilities next to a medical school where there's lots of healthcare professional schools, and these young men could live independently. They could go to college. They could also be cared for by people in the healthcare professions, which would create relationships and which would create interaction and maybe great ideas about things to do next, robotics or how to improve healthcare. Because I think what happens now is young men are living into their 30s and they're living at home. Yeah. And the idea of access to education or employment are just not there at this moment. So I think changing that, and then finally, policies and governments often in the United States, of course, if you make it over a certain threshold of income, then you lose your services. So I think there's lots of things we need to do for people who are disabled and should be productive because their mind's working and their humanness is working and their ability to contribute is there. Yeah. And so I think we should make the most of that.
Definitely. You talk about genetic testing. For my sake, I mean, I don't know a great deal about Duchenne's. I've been researching a little bit over the week. What's involved in the genetic testing?
So genetic testing for Duchenne has vastly improved over the years. So what we usually need is a little bit of blood. And so there is a device that is being developed, a couple of different devices where you could, there's a little device that's in Australia right now and being developed where it looks like a belt buckle, but the part that's the belt buckle, it has a needle on it. So you would pull it apart, stick your finger, get a single drop of blood. It goes into this reservoir, which separates the cells out. You can mail it anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what you need for genetic testing. So we could, and I don't claim to understand how to do it. We work with a couple different labs, and the labs have a capability of diagnosing the neuromuscular diseases, not just Duchenne, but Limb-Girdle and FSH and others. So, and the testing, the cost of testing has come down considerably in this country. But if you're in Zambia, the testing is much more difficult because you have to get the blood sample, which shouldn't be so hard. You have to mail it somewhere. What you're mailing can't be damaged by weather or heat or cold or water, right, in the mailing process. Then it has to go to one of the labs to be able to do it. And often what I find in major labs, they do what's in front of them, and from other countries, that's not a priority. So I think if we could facilitate genetic testing, we could really identify these patients, and then we'd have a better way, certainly, of including them in terms of trying to improve care. Because right now we can protect the heart with drugs like losartan or an ACE inhibitor. So we could do that. And those are inexpensive drugs and available all around the world. So I think we probably can't today deliver gene therapy in Zambia, but that's not to say we shouldn't try. And so I think making headway in terms of getting people with the right diagnosis, trying to use the tools that we have at our fingertips in medicine that are available in those countries, and then trying to think through how do we really manage trying to deliver some of these breakthrough therapies. And we do and have talked to people in the UN because, as you know, during the pandemic, there was worldwide and apparently had some lack of efficiency delivery of the COVID vaccine. So I think looking at those models and saying, how did that work? What were the challenges? What failed? So that as we try to reach out to these systems, that we can put a system in place to try to, address this. I think every child deserves to reach for their dreams. And I would love to see us in the world try to do our bit to, just like Lions has done amazing work, right? Reaching out. I think that trying to look at those models and say, could we take one little boy and give him a treatment that maybe will have him walk for a very long time?
Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be amazing?
I even look at it as maybe partner with more, have more opportunities to partner, because I think that right now in today's society, we need to be partnering more with those that can do it. I know Lions are in over 200 countries around the world. Maybe that's something that we could look at, working together, partnering together with, being able to do these testings. Because like you said, there's a lot of different diseases that could be looked at with this blood sample, and we could be helping people all the way around the world through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so the device exists, right, to get the blood. And we're talking about you can get blood out of your finger or your earlobe. So it's not an invasive, we're going to, have to draw venous blood and, so it's not that difficult to get a blood sample. And then we could really make a difference in countries like South Africa or Africa itself or India, where some of the people live in such rural areas that you have to go out to them. And so and according to their culture, you don't want to come in there and say, I'm drawing your blood. And that must be very scary. But I don't know about what my experience has been with little boys. If you can stick their finger and they see their blood, they're very excited about that whole idea. Especially the other side of this is we can do see what's happening. Now we're not to the fact that we can do testing of the urine, but we'll get there. But also we can do a cheek swab. So you can go take a swab of their cheek and send it for genetic testing. So there's all sorts of simple methods without frightening people, because medicine can be a frightening thing. People they don't know can be frightening. And so if you go in there and teach them simple techniques, and we can say in X period of time, in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to give your doctor that diagnosis, and then we're going to help you in these ways. I think you could. Families.
I think it's really exciting. I think it's really exciting opportunity. I think. I mean, while we were in Morocco just recently, we were fortunate to get involved in some vision camera training and vision screening. And I think while we were there, we must have screened about 1,500 people. And all those children were either provided with spectacles to sort their vision out, or if they needed something more serious, like cataracts or something like that, they were put on the list. Cataract surgery was provided to them. And that's what Lions are doing all over the world. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't, look at a program where we can do genetic screening in Zambia or India or South America. Because I was actually on a call at lunchtime, and there was a line from Panama, Paraguay, India, and 2 from Nairobi. And that was just this lunchtime. And Chris and I both know a lot of influential people in those countries. Certainly in India and in Africa, and it'd be really cool if we could try and help to facilitate that in some way.
I remember talking to a mom who lived outside of Morocco, I think, and didn't have any ability to get into a medical office to get her son diagnosed, right? And she was trying to figure out, what do you need to be able to tell me what's wrong with them? And we just couldn't even facilitate it. I thought, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. You can mail something to her, because I asked her if she got mailed. She said, yeah, not very frequently, but that's something, right? You could mail to her. A cheek swab is easy enough. Anybody can do that. And then you could get a diagnosis to her and then figure out what the next step is. Again, For me, it's taking the first step. If you take the first step, then you can always see a path forward.
Well, and that's one thing that we've got to see firsthand in Morocco. There was the Lions over there, a lot of them are doctors. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is they want to help out and they want to get to the community. The Moroccan Lions, we got to meet some of them, and we were actually out in the middle of nowhere. And there was a lady that came up to us and was speaking another language. I had no idea. And we had to get another lion to communicate with them. And the lion came up and said that they were needing a doctor in a nearby village. And the grandma was wanting to know when they could come out and see the child, because they were in dire need of help. And it was one of those things where the Lions were like, yeah, we'll be there tomorrow, and we'll go out and we'll go help them. So luckily we have great people all the way around the world that are doing great things. Mm-hmm. We just have to be able to see how we can help them. I would love to give them one of the kits to say, hey, if you have this diagnosis, this is what you need to look at.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of partnering is also when you mentioned doctors in Morocco, if they're neurologists, we have an annual meeting of experts in neuromuscular diseases to offer them the sponsorship to come listen, right? Obviously, language is a barrier, and so if they spoke English, that would be helpful. But I think it's also that kind of training. How can we help facilitate that kind of training so that they can readily identify it and they know what tools to use and how to get genetic testing? So I think there's so many things we can do to really change a life, and that's what I think is sort of the best thing ever, to know somebody is a better life.
That's what we're here to do.
And I wanted to tell you one thing. So another thing that has come through what PPMD has done is the ability to raise funds in all sorts of different ways. And one of the different ways that my son, Sam, set up 10 years ago was to do a gaming marathon where he could actually play video games online, and he could make a difference raising funds to help out people in different pathway. And I wanted to let you know that Pat, this last year, the 10th anniversary, we're able to raise $1,000 that we'll be sending to PPMD to in his name from this different event. I want to thank you for all that you've done for him.
Well, thank you, Chris. That's amazing. I mean, he is such a spectacular boy and such love from a family. He will always be a memory for me that's very loving. And as we watched and tried to figure out what happened and how things are going to progress, you know much more than me. That was heartbreaking. So in his name, that's really wonderful. We will treasure it.
Thank you. And I did sign up. Speaking of running, back to the running, 9 years ago, I was actually able to go down to the Star Wars marathon and ran a half marathon with my dad. And that meant a lot to us doing that with PPMD. And I'm actually signed up for the Marine Corps Marathon this year as well.
Oh, are you?
And I'm going to be doing that for PPMD as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you. In January, I'm going to run with my granddaughter. Well, she'll probably be 10 miles ahead of me at the outset. But anyway, we're going to do that together. So she didn't have a chance to meet her uncles, but we talk about them. And the fact that she can run and they couldn't, I think is a good way to think about running.
Yeah. And I'm definitely not a runner.
No, neither. Not a runner.
I never wanted to run. I played other sports in high school, and I was like, no, I don't want to run. Why would I want to run? It's like there's no purpose. But I can tell you this, I have a purpose now, and I know what my purpose is, and it's to find a cure for these kids. Give them one more chance.
Give them one more chance. I agree. And maybe
is there anything that you would like to say to the crowd as far as like finding a purpose, or how someone should look at going through that door time that's closed to give them a pathway going forward?
I think at the end of the day, we're all here for something, right? We're all here for a purpose. And I think that we're granted a certain number of minutes on this earth. And at the end of the day, I want those to be good minutes. And I think we live in a world where there's a lot of pain and suffering and unkindness. And I think to the degree that we can work together and change a life together, I think that's what matters. And I think the Lions have done such spectacular work that again, find your purpose, find your family, find the person next to you that can help you and hold your hand when the going gets rough. And I think that's what we all have to do.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Pat. I appreciate you taking the time out with us, and look forward to all the different great things that PPMD is doing and helping out, like you said, more than just with Duchenne, helping out all these others by providing a path forward. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the future.
Good. Thank you both.
It's been a real privilege for me to sit on both of your very personal stories. So thank you so much for sharing those. It's been incredible.
Thanks for including me.
Around the world, Lions are restoring sight and transforming lives, thanks to your support of Lions Club International Foundation. This powerful story from Kenya shows just how far your impact can see.
Here we are today at the Joytown School for the Physically Challenged. And we had the opportunity, thanks to a Lions Clubs International Foundation grant, to come here and examine the 400 children that reside here and live here. They've never had eye exams, and so we have several eye doctors, a lot of line volunteers, and we were able to come and give them complete eye exams, both auto refraction and eye health, and then for those that needed glasses, we were able to fit them with frames and have glasses made for them. And those that had medical conditions that we were able to delineate, we were able to arrange for medical care for them if it was included surgery or if it was just medications that they needed for infections. The vision impact for these young people is that 80% of what is taught in schools is presented visually. So if they're not efficient visually, their capacity to learn is already diminished. So our goal is to eliminate that 80% and give them full capacity to see and to learn what they're being taught by these great teachers. For the children that have severe visual restrictions, without the eye exam and without the resultant glasses or surgery, they're going to be limited their whole life because they may not have another opportunity for that. They may not be able to progress. They're already dealing with physical challenges, and we're probably fixing or trying to fix the simplest one, the visual challenge, and we have the capacity to do that. They just didn't have the avenue to get to it. So that's what our goal is. A day like this is priceless. When you see you can make the difference in the life of a child, in the life of a person, but especially a child. They have a lot of life left, and these young people, 8 and 9 years old, their future is all in front of them, and if we can help them, that's the greatest feeling in the world. It's priceless.
That's just one story. Join us on June 1st as we tell the story of how LCIF is changing lives in every corner of the world. Real people, real service, real change. Be a part of something global. Sign up today to get your personalized link delivered in your time zone and your language at lionsvirtual.org. Because together, we're not just telling stories, we're making them happen.
Thank you for joining us on Voices of Purpose. If today's story moved you, inspired you, or sparked a thought, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, live it, let it drive purpose in your own life. Until next time, stay grounded, stay inspired, and keep using your voice for good.